We had a really interesting question come up in our profiler training group. No, not this season, because we're just now opening up the class. At the time of this recording, we're just now opening up the new class for profiler training. But in the previous one, we had a really interesting question at our first Q&A for that class. And I almost didn't understand what was being asked.
Yeah.
Initially, you actually had to clarify, which is, I usually know what people are asking me, but I was so confused by the question, I couldn't meet them halfway.
Well, the context, I think, was the reason.
Yes, exactly. So the student, now we have people come in from every level of understanding and awareness of the system. We have people who have been studying it for years and years and years and know every square inch of the system. And we have people sign up that just heard about Myers-Briggs like maybe a couple months ago. We've had that happen a couple times. And so I think this was a newer student, not just new for us, but new to the system. Mm-hmm. And the question was basically, how do I find all the stereotypes, right? And I was confused by the question because they didn't ask it that way. They were like, is there like a way to sort of get a snapshot picture of each of these types? And I didn't realize that they were asking, how do I find stereotypes of each of the 16 types to familiarize myself with them as a concept?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there was two reasons why I didn't understand the question. First, I didn't even think until that moment of the value of stereotypes, because I'm always trying to encourage people to get out of stereotype thinking.
Yeah.
And so the idea that there might be value to beginning with stereotypes was not something I had considered until this moment, until somebody was asking me for them. Because
at profiler training, two primary energies come in. One are people that have enough familiarity with the system to already have the stereotypes, and they almost see those as patterns in the world that aren't really patterns. And the other person that often enters is somebody that really goes deep in the system. They have so much system knowledge that they sometimes project the system outward onto people rather than letting the person reveal their type. They try to project things out. So we do a lot of work in the program to remove those things from people, to help work through and help them see a better way of the profiling experience.
Right. That's where we start. We start by saying, okay, unlearn everything you think you know. So, and not because they're necessarily wrong, but because it's valuable to get into a beginner's mind, no matter, like if you're starting a new skill.
Yeah.
I think of Neil Peart, who as a drummer was one of the top, he's considered one of the top 3 best rock drummers of all time. Everybody knows how much I love Neil Peart. I did an entire podcast episode when he died. It was very tragic for me. But I remember when he decided he wanted to learn a new style of drumming after being a rock drummer for like 20-something years. And he went totally back to basics. He held his drumsticks completely differently. He handed himself over to this classic...
Is it Buddy Rich? Did he study with Buddy Rich? Or
No.
No, I guess that guy would have been long dead, right?
Yeah.
What am I thinking?
Yeah, but it was that style of drumming. And so he started studying like basically jazz drumming and went back to the basics. And every time I think about that, I go, that's when we're learning a new skill, it doesn't matter what level of proficiency we come at, having that beginner's mind will give so much more richness. So that's what we always do, go back to beginner's mind. And I hadn't considered it before, but when somebody comes in truly a beginner, they need what I am now thinking of as coloring book level understanding of type. So a coloring book has very bold lines. They're very dark, definitive, bold lines to give the most sort of encapsulated understanding of an image. And there's lots and lots and lots of space, blank space. And of course it is, because it's a coloring book. That's its intention, is to give you lots of places to color, to color within these bold lines. But it's really doesn't give you very much information. It just gives you a concept of a piece of information. And then I think on the other side of understanding type is what I would call the masters, right? It's a Van Gogh, Monet, Renoir, like it's when you look at their paintings, these masterpieces, these pieces of art, there are no lines. There's just kind of colors pushed up against each other, which is a little closer to reality. right? How reality works. But even at that level, it's important to remember it's still a representation of reality, not actual reality. Even when you're looking at like a masterpiece like Starry, Starry Night, Van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night, it's a gorgeous picture that pulls you into it. And also, it's a representation of what it must have looked like. It's not the actual thing. So going back to the story, their question was, where do I find the coloring book descriptions of the 16 types? And all I could think was everywhere. If you go into the space of type, that's everywhere, right? Memes, the 16 types, like on Instagram and on YouTube, and basically every community has coloring book level understanding.
So as an example of this, I see it all the time online. I have ENFP preferences. The stereotype, it's become a meme now. So you could also say a meme level understanding too, not just stereotype. I think stereotype would probably be a word that maybe we would have used 10 or 20 years ago. And I bet memes are becoming more of the replacement word here. The meme of an ENFP is that we walk around the world vomiting rainbows of emotion and excitement onto everybody. Now, there's a reason why that meme, that stereotype's developed, and particularly INTJs, right? They're like, oh, you vomit rainbows onto me. That's like the funny meme. There's some truth to these memes and these stereotypes, but that would be an example of an oversimplification of what an ENFP means.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I don't feel like you have to go very far to find those. And also, they are sometimes contradictory. Like, what's a really good, solid stereotype or meme of each of the types?
They also lock you into one version of that type, too. Like, you as an ENTP preferences, you're the Doc Brown mad scientist stereotype meme.
Right.
Right? And that's not necessarily, I mean, you do have a little bit of that in you, but that's not necessarily the way you show up to the world most times.
Right. So little of it that I don't really see myself in that way, even though when I first saw that stereotype, when I figured out I was an ENTP, there was a part of me that got it. I was like, oh yeah, that's how I see myself a little bit, even though I don't show up that way at all. There's a little bit of a mad scientist component inside of me that's taking models of human development and smushing them together and figuring out new models and that kind of thing.
It's resonant in some way.
Thank you. It's resonant, exactly. So going back to the question, when you said, I think what she's asking is stereotypes. You're looking for stereotypes. And the person said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And then it was like, oh, well, they're all over the place. So that created in me this, or it kind of, I don't know, it pinged for me this idea of like, that's actually where we need to start. That's where almost everybody has to start, is at a coloring book understanding of type. And it serves its purpose. Now, if that's the first place and Van Gogh is the final form, what are all the steps in between, right? Where do we go from a coloring book? I mean, I saw a coloring book version of Starry, Starry Night, and it was fun, and you can color it, and also it's not the real thing. And as I mentioned before, even Van Gogh isn't the real thing, right? It's just a beautiful representation. So if stereotype is at the beginning, what's at the end? And what are the phases in between?